It's Create Day, my friends. In this video, I am going to upcycle an old wooden sign and an old rusty mailbox. Welcome to my channel. Let's get started. I'm going to start off with the old rusty mailbox. It's pretty beat up. Got some dings and some bends in the metal and lots of rust. So this little guy needs some work. I'm going to start off by giving the inside and outside a coat of my Rust-Oleum automotive enamel that will help stop the rust. And then I'm going in with Dixie Belle's Hurricane Gray to give it a good base coat. I'm going to do this inside and out. Once that was dry, I decided to use Dixie Belle's Soft Pink. I wanted this to be a fun, kind of shabby chic look, and I know this pink isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I thought it would be fun to try this, and I thought it would go really well with the transfers I want to use. Now, I did, I think, 3 coats to get full coverage, but on the inside, I did not go all the way down to the bottom and try to cover all of that because it won't show anyway. You can put, florals and whatnot in here. So I just wanted to make sure the parts that you could easily see would all be nice and covered. I'm going to be covering that opening on the front there where you would stick like an address label. I'm going to make a label out of these molds that I got from Amazon, and I will leave the links to these items and a product description list in the description box. So I put some cornstarch in the mold, and now I'm going to use my air dry clay and make a little clay label to glue on the front of that. In this particular set that I got off of Amazon, you get 5 different labels on each mold. So you have a total of 10 different labels, and they're all very pretty. So I'm quite happy with it. So now I'm just going to make sure that back is nice and smooth, and then I can just roll this out of that mold and show you my casting. I'm going to use IOD's Letterpress Stamp set so that I can make an imprint of a couple of numbers on here as if that was the address of the house. I just picked randomly, I just did a 5 and a 4, no rhyme or reason, and I'm just pressing those into that clay. I'm using Gorilla Wood Glue to attach this casting to the front of the mailbox. And you can use different types of glue. Aleene's Tacky Glue works well, and Titebond works well. A lot of people use that, but this is what I have on hand, so that's what I'm using. Now this mold doesn't cover up those 2 holes, but and you could get creative and do something with your clay, or if you have resin pieces that you're using or whatever, to cover those up, but I wasn't concerned about that. I just thought it looked fine just the way it is. So now I'm just going in and painting that mold before it dries with the same soft pink paint. So now it's time to go ahead and just apply that 3rd coat. And once that's dry, I'm going in with Dixie Belle's Grunge Glaze. I'm going to work this into all the details of that label casting, and then I will also apply it to the lettering on the top of the mailbox. And then from there, I will go ahead and apply it over the entire mailbox, just brushing on and wiping back the excess. I just want to give it a little bit of age with this. I'm using the same Hurricane Gray paint from Dixie Belle, a little watered down with a very small paintbrush just to go in and get that to kind of flow into those two numbers on the front of that casting. So you just kind of have to play around with it with what works. At one point I had too much water on there, but I just wanted it to easily flow in there and add a little more color to those so they would stand out better. Now for the word mail on top, those are slightly raised letters, and I want to color those in as well. So I'm using a dry brush with very little paint so that it doesn't flow down into the recessed area. I just want it to sit on top of those letters. For my transfers, I'm using Iron Orchid Designs Elysium Transfers. I'm picking out one page. There are 4 total in this set, and I'm going to use almost the entire page between these two projects, the mailbox and the sign. I'm cutting these out and figuring out, which piece I want where, and then applying them with a little transfer stick. These designs, they are made to also go all together as one piece, but you can also cut them up and use them any which way you'd like. So I get that rubbed on there with my transfer stick. Then I can remove that carrier sheet and then burnish it with the same carrier sheet just to make sure it's adhered really well. I didn't want to overwhelm this with covering the whole thing in transfers. I am concentrating mostly on just the sides and a little bit on the front. And that's where I got that transfer stuck to my finger. When you're using these smaller pieces, you have to be really careful because it will come off and stick on your fingers, and then it's not on your project. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some more transfers to this, and then we can move on to the next step. I'm taking some 320 grit sandpaper just to lightly scuff up all of my transfers. You want to go really light on this so that you don't remove more than you want. You can always press a little harder if you need to, but start off with a very light hand. Now I'm switching to a 220 sandpaper so that I can distress these edges a little bit. I want to go very carefully because I do want to get some of those spots down to the original Hurricane Gray color, but I don't want to go through it and bring back that metal, the original gold metal. And with that all done, it's time for some clear wax. I'm using Jolie's, and I'm going to brush this on liberally over the entire piece and then wipe it back. And next I'm going in with Jolie's finishing wax in the color white, and I'm going to do the same thing, brushing it all over the entire piece and then wiping the excess back. Now for that front little latch, I wanted to have something to stick in there to make it close because it kind of was bent and it wouldn't stay closed, and I just thought it looked naked. So I've got these little 1/4-inch dowel pins. You can get them on Amazon, and I'll leave the link below. And I'm going to just paint that the same hurricane gray color, and then go over it with the Spanish copper rub and buff, but not yet, because here I'm using the Spanish copper rub and buff on the edges of my mailbox. And I also use the rub and buff on that little metal piece that hangs down on the bottom for your outgoing mail, but I don't have the footage for that. I don't know what happened to it. I use a brush to apply the rub and buff to the high spots on my casting, because my finger would have just gotten it all over the place. So I use my little brush for this, and then do it around that little clasp or latch or whatever you call it on the mailbox. And then I also go around the edges where it says mail. And here's where I'm applying that rub and buff to the little dowel pin. I actually have another step that I do on that dowel pin, but in the meantime, I'm going to make a little bow to put onto the metal part there where you would put like your outgoing mail. So I'm just going to make a little bow out of this lace ribbon that I got from Michael's, and then I'm going to apply this paper flower from Hobby Lobby into the center of the bow. Now back to our little dowel pin. I put some nail head studs on the end. I just hot glued them on the end, and I'm going to show you with this other pin since I did it off camera. I got these from Hobby Lobby, and they almost fit perfectly on the end, but I had to cut off the little pointy sections that you would be able to hammer these down into something. So I just cut those off, hot glued one on each end, and then went ahead and went over it with my Spanish copper rub and buff. And that just finished this off really nicely. I like the way it turned out. It's just a word of caution: when you go to snip those off, you want to have your hand cupped, because those little shards will fly out, and you don't want something like that getting in your eye. Or you could wear eye protection, whatever you prefer. I went ahead and just added some pretty little florals to this, and that completes our mailbox project. Let's take a look at how it turned out. Now I'm moving on to the sign. This thing has a ton of paint on it. It has a nice hanger on the back, so I'm going to keep that. But I sanded it down really well as best I could to remove most of it. There were layers and layers of paint. And then I gave it 2 coats of my Blossom White spray paint. I'm using this Suede textured paint by Deco Art, not because I wanted the texture, but because I like the color. It's called charcoal, and it looks brown on this camera view, but it's actually like a very warm charcoal color, and I just really liked it. So I'm going to go ahead and just paint this on. I'm going to do a couple of coats, and then I can sand back that texture because it has kind of a sandy, gritty texture to it. So once it's all painted and dried, I just sand that back a little bit to make it nice and smooth for my transfers. And here's where I'm showing you, if you can see it, how it's got that sandy texture to it. So now I'm using my 180 grit sandpaper to go ahead and knock down some of that texture in the middle of the board. And then I will take that piece of sandpaper and kind of fold it up and get in all those little grooves so that I can distress those edges back down to the white paint. I don't do a heavy distressing, just little spots here and there. I'm using a folk art mesh stencil. These are meant to be used with an acrylic stencil paste so that you have a thicker medium to push down through that mesh. I don't have that, but I do have some modeling paste and some acrylic paints, and I'm going to mix those together. I'm going to blend the white with the linen to get an off-white color, and then I'm going to mix in my modeling paste to thicken it up. Here I'm applying my stencil. It has a sticky back, so it lays down nice and flat. I have to make sure I get it centered, and then we will be ready to apply our mixture of modeling paste and the paint. So I just mix these up until I get the color that I want, and then I add the modeling paste to the paint. I don't know for sure what the ratio was that I mixed this, but I wanted it to be the consistency of kind of like pudding. So I think I ended up doing about half and half paint to modeling paste. I'm using this little silicone, almost like a squeegee type scraper to just get that mixture on there and press it down in through the mesh. And what I learned was you want more product on that rather than less. And instead of pressing so hard, you press lighter with more product and it just will easily flow down in through that mesh. If you use less product and you press harder, it can cause bleeding. And I did get a little bit of bleeding on the W, but the rest of it turned out perfect. Once that was dry, I decided to pick out my transfers from the Iron Orchid Designs Elysium transfer set. And I'm just laying this out here so that I can get an idea as to what sections I want so that I know where to cut. And I do just like I did on the mailbox. I cut, like put it back on there, make sure I'm moving in the right direction and getting what I want. And then I proceed to cut out the sections of the transfer that I want to use. Once I have some of my main pieces picked out and laid on the board to see how they will look, I go ahead and start applying these, removing the backing and then using my transfer tool to burnish them onto the surface of the sign. Those little areas where you have the groove at the top and bottom, I just stuck my little transfer stick down in there to kind of press those down and then burnished in that by folding up that carrier sheet just to make sure that they were adhered well down into that little crevice, just like the rest of the transfer. Now I'm going to use my sandpaper to scuff up the edges and the insides of those little grooves on the top and bottom of my sign. And then I will get a finer grit sandpaper to scuff up the actual transfers. I'm giving this 2 coats of my polyacrylic matte sealer. I am doing the front first, and I did not paint the back of this sign because the wood cleaned up really well. So I decided to leave it as just the wood finish, and then I will seal it with this polyacrylic sealer. When my polyacrylic sealer on the back is dried, this project is done. And now we can look at how everything turned out. Thank you so much for stopping by today. I hope you find my content useful and will give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. But most importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.